Rivera here today. We're going to share with you a very simple, but very concise sample of a project charter. This charter is intended specifically for an IT facilities project, which we've built and we've used for several years in the past, of course, with a few modifications and tweaks. This charter is intended to be like used during a project kickoff meeting, but you can certainly use it for other periodic updates to the project team. Just be sure that you update it as you go. All right. So our agenda today is to go over these items. An executive, so your project charter will have an executive summary, and again, we'll show you all this. It will need to have a project high-level overview. If it's needed, we're not going to show it here, but obviously we don't know what the project is about, and we did not want to disclose any customer data. So number 2 here in the agenda, you will need to build that your own, okay? And we can obviously give you some directions and samples. A project steering committee and core team meeting. You're going to have that, and a team. You're going to have to build that team. Obviously, roles and responsibilities. We'll share how we've built these presentations that include these very specific. Again, every project has unique roles and responsibilities. So we're going to be using somewhat of a very general term for our projects in terms of roles and responsibilities, but you get the idea. You want to ensure that you include an in and out of scope sort of statement. It's important for you to convey what's in scope and what's out of scope. For you seasoned PMs, this is very obvious, but for the younger PMs that have studied PMO practices, we're going to give you an example here of what's pretty straightforward, and it's proven. We've shown this to several execs, and it works. It's simple. Number 6 is just really a timeline example. Like I said, this project is an example or a sample. I want to be slow here so that you understand what we're trying to convey. It is intended for an IT facilities project. So line item 6 here is really a timeline for constructing a building. And what you will realize is, if you're not familiar with these terms already, is not many buildings have a garage, but we're going to give you an example of a project in where, we built a garage. We helped manage the building of the garage, the construction of the garage. And, of course, what construction companies call a core and shell. And that's really the building structure itself. You want to understand your resources that you're going to use for this project. It's key that you do. It's key for many reasons. And this isn't just IT resources, obviously. If you are responsible for the overall construction of a building that includes IT items, obviously you're going to want to know what those resources are and how you're going to share that information once you understand how much time and expertise you need out of these resources. Okay, sometimes they are not within IT. Often they're not. They're within other departments. If you're building a manufacturing building in where it's GXP related project, you want to know where those resources are, how much of their time you're going to use, and that you want to make sure you get their approval. The approval of those resources, obviously, from the managers. And then, of course, we're going to talk about some assumptions here. Okay, and obviously, every project has an assumption. From a project charter standpoint, you want to outline these assumptions. And this is just, it's not to cover your butt, it's really more to ensure that those assumptions are communicated. All right? So, next up, let's move to an executive summary dashboard, or a sort of like a status page. And everything that you see here in this particular example right here, you're going to see this in italic. And every time you see this, you need to insert your own information. Okay? Again, we didn't want to, and we wouldn't want to, disclose customer information. So insert your description here. Be concise and make sure that it's not surprising to executives. Right? They're supposed to know what these projects are. Don't surprise them. You're going to want to give them a status on the IT budget. Again, this is coming from an IT perspective in terms of IT facilities. So we're only including in this section right here everything that's IT related. This particular example of a project, I left some numbers here and I had to remove other numbers to protect customer information, but it was a $8.8 million budget just from an IT standpoint. All the equipment and all the services, including professional services and some level of contingency that you would include in there, was 8.8 million. You want to also ensure that the execs are aware of the benefits of this project. So insert that verbiage in there. It's important. And you may resize this, but you want to make sure that as a project manager for this project, that you are aware of all the benefits for the project. So that goes in here. Give them an update on the milestones from a timeline standpoint, right? And you may have to update this to adhere to your own PMO practices and methodologies. But if you use standard practices and methodologies from PMI, you're going to have to outline the timeline for preparation, blueprint, build. You're going to have some sort of a user acceptance testing period. And then you're going to cut over. How long is that going to take to bring the building alive from an IT standpoint? And then you're going to go live. Sometimes the reason we've separated these is that the cut over here is really just to prepare the building. But then you may have a different date for when people move in that you have to have that building completely ready from an IT standpoint. Phones work, data works, your video network works, everything works. Okay, so I put these placeholders here. I just didn't have any particular deadlines or any specific goal lives. These are just placeholders. And then, depending on the size of the project, or the building in this case, you want to ensure that you have post go live support. In this particular case, we gave a full month of, in case any users have issues with any IT related items, whatever they are, from printers to network boards to communication in general, wireless coverage, everything. That you give yourself 1 month to cover that. In some cases, the executives will want to know the construction schedule, sort of timelines, and the milestones. And so this is, again, not just this, but everything that you see here, it's obviously custom built to what your project is about. All right? And so these are sort of the equivalent milestones for your IT in the construction side, right? And this particular one, the schedule, refers to a new build, not a TI, not a tenant improvement. So put those dates in there, just like you did above. You are also required to communicate who the sponsors and the stakeholders, the major stakeholders, are for the project. You want to be sure you communicate that. What you're doing here is you're making everybody that's watching, everyone that's watching this presentation, once you have it ready, they know who the sponsors or sponsor, sometimes it's one, sometimes it's multiple, and the same with stakeholder or stakeholders. Put them in here. All right. Okay. Next, let's move to project steering committee and core team roles and responsibilities. Again, every time you see this data here in italic, you want to modify it. And you want to tune. The idea, folks, for this here presentation is not to pick on every single item here. Oh, that doesn't apply to our organization. Yes, it may not. Modify it. But you want to have a column with roles, the name of the person or persons, in plural, and their responsibilities. It's simple. In this particular case, because of the size of the project, again, it was a construction, a new build. In fact, it was a new campus project. So it had a few names in here. In fact, several names, as well as the core team. You want to separate these two teams because of the responsibilities. The core team members are dealing with a lot more versus the project steering committee members are dealing with higher level responsibilities. And you want to make that clear, okay? And again, tune it. Tune this. This is an example. And then you're going to want to move down to the other sort of teams and their roles and their responsibilities. So in IT facilities, like I said, you're going to have a project sponsor, or more than one, and here are the responsibilities. In some cases, you will have, or unless you are this person, individual yourself, you're going to have an IT facilities project manager. And here, outline your responsibilities. And if you follow some sort of a guideline or standards internal to the organization, make sure that you outline them here in terms of responsibilities. You know what your role is, so put your name in. And if you have to tune it, this verbiage, it's again, is built for IT facilities, but it's a good sort of sample or example. You're going to have a person from the facilities department involved. And depending on the size of the organization, you may end up having a project manager from the facilities department. And in some cases, depending on how big your organization is, you may end up having a construction PM that is different than a facilities PM, right? But in most cases, because of sort of how the IT facilities projects are handled, we often see this sort of role and responsibility given to one person in terms of construction and facilities. You're going to have your IT technical lead, or again, depending on the size of the project, you're going to have more than one lead, and they're going to lead in different sectors or different responsibilities, different verticals. But you're going to have that too. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the example here of the in and out of scope. I will keep reminding you that this is a IT facilities project charter. We have other charters in which we will share, but this one happens to be an IT facilities charter. And if you've watched some of our other videos around MPO and MDF standards and methodologies, you will see that what's in here reflects what is included in that video that we released. All right. So regardless of the content, you want to maintain the structure, the scope, area, whatever it is, what's in and what's out of scope. It's simple. Okay. In this particular case, again, we wanted to outline the in and out of scope items for the garage, as well as for the corn shell, which is the next screen. Next, you want to give everyone an update on the timeline. This particular one is for the garage. This happened to be a 2000 spot garage, 2000 actual car spots. And so it was a multi-year project, but we did manage to give them, I updated this to remove, again, to protect customer data, but we used the PMO standards and methodologies for managing this project. And where you have your prep work, blueprint build, your testing, and this was particular to IT and IT facilities as well as facilities. You were testing alarms and you were testing structured cabling, you were testing a bunch of stuff. And then you went live, and then you offered, from an IT standpoint, again, a post go live support. We did the same thing with the corn shell or the building itself. And next up is the IT resource utilization schedule. You want to ensure that you secure the resources from each team within the organization. And this, again, example is IT. So you will have project managers, network managers, network engineers, network architects. On the voice side, you will have security, etc. So the big takeaway here is timeline and the percentage of what you will need estimated from their time based on 40 hours a week. So if it's 50% in some cases, you will need obviously 20 hours of their time a week. You want to make sure that you get that approval from your managers. For, in this case again, garage and the core and shell. It's concise, it's simple, it's easy to understand, and for all levels of participants. Next, we want to talk about assumptions. And this is assumptions for the project itself. For example, if you work for a larger organization, the purchasing department needs to ensure that they adhere with your timeline for delivering all the services that you are deploying to the building, right? So you're going to have to make sure that IT will approve all the purchase orders timely. That's important. Make sure that the managers in your meeting are aware of that. In a lot of cases, again, going back to the fact that this is an IT facilities project charter, the business teams will have to help you co-manage the project. And you're updating each other. You're probably going to be sitting in some MEP meetings, construction meetings, whether they're domestic or not, and you will want to keep track of the schedule as it changes, as well as the scope. You also want to make sure that you're making an assumption that the decisions from the stakeholders will not take a whole lot of time and that they'll be timely. And I mean timely here from a standpoint that they cannot sit on requests in terms of approvals for a long time. Otherwise, that can introduce delays. And also, from a change management standpoint, if it does change, that, or in other words, if you introduce, not you, but the project members introduce any changes, what does that mean to the scope and schedule and even budget, right? You need to make sure that they will be aware and that you're going to avoid as much as possible any changes to the scope of the project. And then finally, you are going to want to coordinate all your testing from a UAT standpoint. You need to, because you need to test printing, you need to test access, you need to test wireless, you need to test a lot of things. And you should have a test plan. Always, right? It's obvious to us IT folks. But in the particular case of a IT facilities project like this one, you're going to want to have a list of all the items that you need to test. And if you are within a GXP environment, in other words, if you work for a medical devices company or food and drugs, science, and where you need some sort of a validation from the FDA here in the US or your FDA equivalent outside of the US, that you have that validation testing completed once you're done with your part of the project. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to allow myself here a plug. This is again another service that we offer, project management for IT facilities. And we have a lot of connections and partnerships with a lot of folks here in the US, primarily, and this is us being honest completely, here in the Bay Area, and in fact in California in general. We are expanding to the West Coast and more, but we've done international projects around IT facilities, and where validation is key, whether you're dealing with the US FDA or the international FDA equivalent. All right, so this is something we do. Please get in touch with us and we'll be happy to work with you. This is it, folks. So we're done. I hope you've enjoyed this video and its content. And if you did, please remember to hit the like button and also subscribe to our channel. That way you get, updates. Thank you again, as always, and have yourself a very good day. Bye now.